Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Examining the Anatomy and Physiology Lab Experience. This webinar has been sponsored by 80 Instruments, so a big thank you to them for helping to make this event possible. Joining us today, we're very fortunate to have Wendy Riggs, an associate professor at College of the Redwoods. Her presentation will identify some of the core student outcomes from the Anatomy and Physiology laboratory experience, and then explore different ways to effectively address those outcomes in a fully online environment. I'm Sarah McFarland from the events team here at Inside Scientific, and I'm very pleased to be your host for today's event. Before we get started, I'd just like to share a few housekeeping notes to help you get the most out of the session. First, this webinar is being recorded and resources will be made available following the event. Next, if the webinar panels look too big or too small, you can zoom in or out in your internet browser to adjust the viewing area. You can also resize some of these panels or make the media panel full screen. We want to hear from you, so please send questions, thoughts, and comments through the chat and ask a question boxes, which are to the right of that slide panel at any time during the presentation today. And you can toggle between these panels by using the buttons on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also take a look at the resources panel, where you'll find a few links and suggested readings associated with today's event. We'll be running a number of audience polls during the webinar and a survey at the end. You can fill that survey out at any time, so please do that before you leave today. And finally, if you happen to experience any technical issues during the event, the easiest fix tends to be a simple refresh of the auditorium by refreshing your browser. If this doesn't work and you continue to have issues, please use that Ask a Question box to communicate your issue with our team, and we'll help to get you back up and running. And before we hear from Wendy, I'm going to run one really quick audience poll. And so this question is, are you currently a HAPS member? Yes or no? And I'll give everybody a couple seconds to answer that. And it's great to see you all being very active in the chat. We want this to be very interactive, so send any comments that you have in that chat panel. All right, it looks like we have most of our answers here. Perfect. Okay, last couple seconds to get those answers in. Okay, and we're going to move on to the presentation. So, Wendy, there you are. You're with us?
I am.
Okay, great. Well, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Well, it's super fun to, well, I can't see anybody. So it's super fun to see the chat, having folks chiming in there. And I want to welcome you and encourage you to use that chat. I noticed that it was about 75% of y'all who are here are Hapsters already. The rest of you guys, come join us because we're a really fun crowd and we like to chat. So I will tell you right now that I probably won't be able to keep track of anything that's happening in the chat. But Sarah will keep track of it for me and holler if there's something that I need to know. So thank you for being here. And thank you, 80 Instruments, for inviting me, and Sarah and Inside Scientific for creating this opportunity. So I know that this is a busy time of year for everyone. And so it's significant that y'all are here. I want to start us off with a land acknowledgement. And I will just read this to you. I think it's just important for us to reflect. And so I'm going to read this acknowledgement of where I am. I'm delivering this webinar from my home, which sits on Wiyot land in Eureka, California, on the shores of Humboldt Bay. Eureka sits on land known in the Wiyot language as Jarojiji, where you sit and rest. This land is next to Humboldt Bay, known as Wigi, after a story about how the bay became a saltwater bay. This is the traditional homeland of the Wiyot peoples of the Wiyot tribe, Blue Lake Rancheria, and Bear River Rancheria. Despite actions sanctioned by the local, state, and federal governments designed specifically to remove the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from this land and destroy their cultural practices, Wiyot people remain on these lands and practice ceremonies central to the maintenance of their traditions, culture, and landscape. They continue to shape the history and knowledge of this place and are actively working to restore the land that was stolen from them. One of the things that I think is important when you do a land acknowledgement is to couple it with action. And so, Sarah, I appreciate that you put that in the chat. The links on this slide are all clickable, so you can go check these out. And I just want to point out the bottom link to nativeland.ca. That's actually a website maintained by Indigenous humans, and you can donate there. And I did that this morning as part of this land acknowledgement. But it's a map, an interactive map that lets you see where you can, whose land you're on. So thank you. And we'll get started. Those of you who know me, you won't be surprised to know the best part of doing things like this is the engagement and the conversation. So I can't see your faces and I can't follow the chat, but know that I encourage you to engage. We're actually going to be hosting a Twitter chat today at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Our Rockin' Communications Committee Chair from HAPS is facilitating this chat on Twitter, and the hashtag is HAPSChat. And then you can ask questions that Sarah will share with me if you have them. And Sarah, of course, you are welcome to interrupt me at any time if that seems appropriate. Again, I want to thank you for being here. I know it's a crazy time. It's the end of the semester when Greg and I sat down and decided on timing for this. We wanted to have this conversation in enough time for you to, we wanted to catch you at the exact point of reflection where you probably are finishing up a semester or a term. And so you might be starting to reflect. You might also be in survival mode, and we understand that. But we wanted to catch you and start thinking and talking about labs before your next semester begins. So it's super admirable that you're here because I know it's really busy time. So we're going to do three things. We're going to look at why we do labs in the first place. We actually invest a tremendous amount of time and energy and resources in laboratory work in our science classes, and our students invest a huge amount of time. And it's resource intensive and time intensive for us to facilitate lab activities. And so I want to spend some time looking at why we do that. And I'm super curious to see what you guys think about that. The next thing that we'll do after we identify why are labs important, then we'll dig in and interrogate, can we do those things that we identified were important? Can we do them in an online environment? I would imagine that if we did a poll right now that asked you to think about your, what you thought was possible online maybe 2 years ago compared to what you think is possible online now, I would imagine that we have grown a little in our capacity to imagine what's possible online. I think it's probably been one of the hardest things to figure out how to do labs online. And then, of course, we're going to wrap it up with some solutions. And like I said, I'm hoping that you guys will throw additional solutions into the chat as we engage in the conversation. Okay, so thinking about why we do labs, I came up with a list, and I would love to start with your brainstorming in the chat. So why do you do labs? What is the thing? And share out, tap into the chat, the reasons why you think lab work is important in the classes that you teach. And we'll see if we can get some ideas going before I just start talking at you with my ideas. The chat is very quiet right now, and that might be because you're like, dude, I came to the thing to find out from you, Riggs. Awesome. There you go. I knew that hamsters had words to say. And if you're not a hamster, join us. Awesome. Excellent. Okay, this is going to be fantastic. The thing I'm mostly looking for, oh, I love you guys so much. This makes me really happy. Let's see how many of your things keep track of the things that I'm going to post up, and keep track of whether or not your ideas match the things that I come up with. Okay, my first one, my first reason. I'm not sure these are in order for me. I think we do labs. I think one of the important possible outcomes of lab work is to encourage students to actually do science. And I am going to read a quote to you from the 2011 Vision and Change report, which is, and the link on there is live if you want to go check that thing out. This is a report. The quote comes from 2008. So this is like 13 years ago. I did the math in my head. I'm going to read you this quote, and 13 years ago, this is what they recommended. I think we will find that we still think this is important. Appreciating the scientific process can be even more important than knowing scientific facts. People often encounter claims that something is scientifically known if they understand how science generates and assesses evidence bearing on these claims. They possess analytical methods and critical thinking skills that are relevant to a wide variety of facts and concepts and can be used in a wide variety of contexts. That was written in 2008. That was a plea to biology educators to think about how we are training students. And I would argue that my lab work has not done this very well, but I would argue also that it is, I think that it's maybe the most important reason to do lab work. Let's look at the next thing that is possibly important. And I did see this in the chat. Allowing students the opportunity to work together. In reflecting on labs, it really is a tremendous amount of time that we put in, and actual time. Like my labs are 3 hours long. I think about, we teach anatomy and physiology separately. I'm at a community college, very small community college, a commuter community college. And our anatomy class, which is a prereq for physiology, there's 6 hours of lab time. They have 2 3-hour labs a week and just 2 hours of lecture during that time. So, in a class like that, first of all, how luxurious for me that we get to have that kind of time. But second of all, it's totally luxurious to have that time and that access to stuff so we can mess around with it. And the best labs, am I right? The best labs are loud. It's when the students are talking about stuff and they're arguing about things and they're trying to figure things out and their eyes are squinty and they're doing that engaging work together. It's really valuable. Let's see what the next one is. Oh, lab work that is designed. Now, this is interesting because this is different. I want to make sure that we're really clear about this is different than applying content that they've learned somewhere else. Read the text and now we're going to apply it. This is discovering ideas. This is an inquiry-based approach that I think is harder for us to do. I think most of our labs tend to be sort of possibly cookbook-y as opposed to truly facilitating the students to figure it out, to discover something, to discover a concept. I think about osmosis, and I always dream about having a lab activity where they don't have the information beforehand, but they get to observe things and then they get to describe themselves what they're observing and why. Like, why would this thing happen? So using lab time to actually help the students discover content is, I think, a really amazing aspect of lab work. I saw this a lot in the chat as it was blowing by me. You guys were chattering away. Giving students the opportunity to apply the things that they have learned about. So they sit through a lecture, they do some reading, they answer some questions, and then they come to the lab and they get to watch it happen. They get to apply what they just learned to a hands-on experience. That's a really valuable aspect of lab work, in my opinion. And then I don't know if I feel like I saw it, but that might have been just me dreaming. Lab work is fun, right? Like, it's totally engaging. It's the thing that makes folks kind of light up. Like, they get kind of curious. They show up in lab and they're like, dude, what toys are we going to play with today? What am I going to try to blow up or push on or break? Like, this is going to be super. What am I going to cut open and look at? Like, lab activities really are quite fun. So I have a poll for you. And the poll is asking, what do you think? You have to pick one. What's the most important one of the list that I gave you? And you are welcome to pick something else as the most important one. But I'm curious what you guys think about of this list, what's most important. Oh, look, we're resulting. Oh, super interesting. Dude, yes, this is so, I know, Heather, it's super hard to just pick one. That's like, wait a minute. I wanted the kind of question where you had to rank them, you know, where you could drag and drop them into an order. I think even that would be hard. It looks like, I think the winner that looks, yeah, totally, Sarah. The winner at this time is looking like applying the concepts to hands-on experiences. And I would argue that most of my labs are that. So most of my labs are designed to do that. But if I had to pick right now, what is most important, I honestly would go with having students do science so that they can understand it. I feel like that, for me, I kind of feel like, whoa, that's really important right now that our students have that kind of awareness. Tracy, I see your question in the chat. This is fantastic. It just happens to be sitting there. We're on a 16-week semester schedule. So I have 15 weeks of content and then a week of finals. And that's how we end up with that kind of time. Okay, so let's look at this list that I came up with, and I'm going to have to go back and look at the chat because I'm sure you guys came up with other things to add. But my next question is, okay, can we do that online? Can we do, like, in looking at all those important things, can we actually pull it off in an online environment? And before we go any further, I'm going to give you a flower and a humerus because you need presence if we're going to consider this, because, oh, deep breath, right? It's hard. What I'm going to tell you is that everybody is thinking about it. Like, because of COVID, everyone is asking the question, what can we do online and what can't we do online? And so we need the flower and the humerus because, am I right? Doing it online is hard. I'm going to argue that we can do all of those things. And I have a tool that like hits the home run at the end of this to convince us that we can do all of these things in the online, fully online environment. But it's a doo-doo load of work. I say that with love and kindness, which is why you have flowers and humeruses. Okay, I wanted to point out these resources. These are reports that I think I think this group is a nationwide group that has evaluated online learning. And it's interesting information there considering pivot versus fully online and online teaching. So it looks like I have another poll for you here. Let's see what this poll is. if you think, I'm curious, if you think that any of these things cannot be done fully online. So I know that's a bad multiple choice question format, but I'm curious to see if you think that, you know what, we actually can't do these things in an online environment. I'm seeing some, fun. Yes, I love that. You can't have fun online. Oh my Lord. I hear that right about now at this time of the semester. Most of us are like going, perhaps it's a little grudging. It's been slow. It's slow to show up. That most of us are saying, well, all of these can be done online. We might not be entirely happy about it. Applying the courses using hands-on experiences, maybe not online. Again, having fun. Oh, sad story, not online. But 65% of us are like, okay, dude, we actually can do them online. But you need humuruses and flowers to make it happen. I just need to name straight up. We got to name the barriers to online classes. And you, I'm sure, have gobs and gobs of stuff in the chat for the barriers. So the 65% of you were like, we can do it all online. Let's see if some of these barriers are part of the other 35% who said, I don't think so. Oh my God. Online. I'm sorry, like the face-to-face scene, I met with my physiology students. I did a random like, oh my gosh, you guys, let's meet at the cadaver lab during Thanksgiving break. And these students that I've never hung out with face-to-face showed up in the cadaver lab. They hadn't ever gotten to hang with the cadavers because they had anatomy online. And we just got to hang out with each other and our donor body humans. And it was so lovely. It was so fun. We were laughing and we were telling stories and it was lovely. And online, sometimes it's harder to feel that stuff. Other barriers. If anybody's used any of the virtual experiments, they're canned. And so, you know, the students push a button and then it just unfolds in front of them. And that kind of canned content is, I would argue that it's boring. And it's also like, it sort of misses the point. Hoop jumpy, like I hate jumping through hoops. I hate jumping through any hoop, and I never want my students to do it. Online lab work often ends up being hoop jumpy. Those discussion forums contribute 3 posts with 500 words. And oh God, that sounds like I can't even say it because it's just so awful. So hoop jumping, it's often something that happens, or we feel it more in the online lab. Giddy up. If you are going to try something a little more adventuresome, like a kitchen lab or some of the things that we're going to be talking about here, it's harder to help students. In the face-to-face lab, one person comes up on a problem and you walk over, you solve the problem, and then you yell to everyone else. And everyone else hears the solution to that problem and you're done. That we solved the problem. It was super efficient. Helping students with tech. Oh my graciousness. Like, can we get any worse task? I don't think so, because I can't help myself with tech. And so how am I supposed to help them when I can't even see them? It becomes so challenging. The lack of equipment. I remember I taught my first online lab course before COVID. I don't know how to describe myself for volunteering to create an online general biology course. And the first semester, I had my students do kitchen labs, and they just had to come up with their own equipment, which they were really mad at me about because they started sharing like, dude, the dollar store has test tubes. Quick, everybody go buy test tubes at the dollar store, because it was so hard. They didn't have the stuff that we have on the shelves in the lab rooms. So Getting them equipment can be challenging in the online lab. Giddy Up, the tech adventures, we've already talked about that. Poke your eyes out, sadness. And I think we got to name it every time, because for us and for students, doing this work online is just, it's massive. It's a tremendous amount of work. So the barriers are really big. And yet, this would be another interesting poll question. Probably 100% of y'all have now done it, right? At some point, March 2020 rolled through and you did something. You did something online. And Cynthia, I'm gonna call out your chat comment that we're exhausted. And the other thing that I think is true is that I don't think it's going away. I don't think there was a point at which my colleagues in my department were like, you can do general biology online, but that's it. Nothing else is going online with a lab. And we sort of blown that up, and we've blown it up in a way because of our hard work, because of the investment and the commitment of instructors making this stuff happen. We've blown that up, and I don't think we're going to be going back. Students need this flexibility, I think. So let's look at some of these solutions. The virtual simulation, some of these things we've talked about already. So the virtual simulations, pros and cons of those things. Most textbook companies, I think, have some sort of virtual simulation platform that they are providing. And so the students do their clicking and walking through. I used lab time to do a couple of worksheet discussion activities. And so they're almost like lab activities, but they're on paper. So it's kind of a different lab. And I actually included some of those in the resources tab for you. And I'll talk about them a little bit more in a second. But that was an easier move to do that online. The wet labs that students are prepping themselves, or that they're getting kits. So if you think about, the multiple ways we all went, oh my God, how are we going to do these wet lab experiences? Either we send students to the grocery store with a grocery list, or we have them purchase lab kits that are delivered to their kitchen table, or they borrow lab kits. I remember at one of our HAPS conferences, have no idea which one, last year, a workshop was given by a couple of women, and can't tell you a thing other than the fact that I was just amazed at what they did. The two of them built hundreds of lab kits for their students, and each student came to campus and picked up a hand created lab kit that had all the equipment that they needed. And then the students returned the lab kits to the department, and those amazing humans went through and put everything away and refilled the lab kits and got them ready for the next semester. So holy workload, but possible. And then the last one, and I'll tell you right now, we're going to give you an opportunity to request more information on these, but this has been a game changer for me this semester, is that I got access to my institution purchased for me LT sensors. And those are what I need somebody to give me a word. They collect data, physiological data collecting sensors so that the data can be analyzed in the computer. And I want to show you a little bit about these possible solutions and sort of, thank you, Nanette, transducers. That's what they are. And we've been able to provide this for our online students. So check out, I took those four flavors of lab activities, and I wanted to show kind of numbers and change over time in my classes. And so I wanted to have a semester to compare to what percentage of my face-to-face human physiology lab activities fall into each one of those categories. So I was using simulations in my face-to-face class. My students would come in on simulation day and they would click through the activity. And we all would stand around and we'd get frustrated because we get stuck on things and they would get tired of clicking, but they would be talking to each other and we did that. So in a normal semester, I was doing that 4 out of 14 of our physiology labs. Those worksheet activities, I talked to you about those. If you click on the resources, one of them is the endocrine rat lab. And there's a paper from 1997 that talks about the creation of this rat simulation that is just spectacular. So we talk about how we could do the actual lab and inject rats with hormones and then kill them and weigh their organs, but it's so much nicer to have paper rats to do this lab activity with. So that's the kind of activity that I would do in the worksheet discussion scene. The other one that I really loved for worksheet discussion category of lab activities was the first lab that I do in all my physio classes. And it's the homeostasis speed dating. And I included a link that describes that lab activity as well, because it can translate into the online scene. So you can check out those resources in the, and do whatever you want with them. Like I linked stuff that you can download, you can change whatever you want. I think this is interesting because only 5 of my 14 labs were wet labs. So those are the labs like the osmosis lab, or we had fake blood and we would do blood typing. My favorite wet lab, of course, is the pee lab, and don't tell anybody, but I totally still got to have my students pee in cups and analyze their pee in my classroom. So that was kind of amazing. That was one of the saddest parts about going online, was having to ditch the pee lab. I put LT sensors in this category, although I did not get them until this year. And the reason why I put them there is because we did have equipment in our face-to-face lab that did the same thing. So we had the equipment that collected sensor data, transducers, then it would go into software and the students would sit around. We'd have a rat, we called them a rat, that the person who was being experimented on, we'd collect data. And we had, 3 labs that were that, where we're using that kind of tool. I want to show you what happened when we went online. And I think this is really important to call out really clearly. When we went online, the first semester was fall 2020, and this was fully online, asynchronous, which means the students did not have any, they were on their own, and so was I. 79% of our labs, 11 out of 14 of the labs were simulations. So we basically took the simulation scene, which of all of those options is, in my opinion, the worst. And we did that almost entirely. The other, next up, the other 21% was the worksheet discussions, which, like I said, are fairly easy to facilitate in an online discussion forum. No wet labs, no sensors, transducers, no data collection. I call that out because I think it's really important to acknowledge again and again and again how much work this takes to put our classes fully online. So in true Riggs and probably all y'all's style, we make improvements semester to semester. And that's one of the best things about teaching, is that we can learn from our experiences and make changes moving forward. So the next semester, we slightly decreased the number. I mean, you can see that I actually deleted 2 simulation labs, but I actually reduced the number of labs by 2. And I'm not exactly sure why that happened, but we'll just go with it. I eliminated a case study from the worksheet discussion scene because we actually added that as an entire assignment category. We added a wet lab. I was team teaching with a colleague who developed a reaction time data analysis lab that was super nice to add into the mix, and we still did not have access to any kind of sensors. If you look at what we've done this semester, I'm getting closer, right? It's getting closer to looking like what we had going on in the face-to-face Giddy Up. We've replaced many of those simulations with wet labs and with the LT sensors. We had 4 labs this semester where the students are using these sensors and sharing data, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Okay, so if we look at these solutions, I think it's really important to measure the solutions against our goals. And I already sort of outed that the do science is one of my big goals. And I feel like moving forward, I'm interested in slowing down a little bit and spending a little bit more time on some labs that really emphasize that process so we can talk about it and name it out really clearly. Every semester, I do some sort of evaluation, an assessment about the process of science and where my students are. We've stalled out at what I would call an unacceptable understanding of the process of science. And I look forward to investing, right? You can't make changes unless you invest time and energy into teaching the students about the thing you want them to be able to do. So I think our solutions do provide the opportunity to do these things. So let me talk through the LT sensors, because I have what I'm going to show you is the slide that was the last slide that I was able to make before Sarah said I had to have them done. So this set of slides from here on out are pretty, that's it. You're seeing the end of our conversation about LT sensors, but I'm going to say words. I wish I had visuals to go with the words, but I want to talk about what these things are. LT sensors, there's a link in the resources, so check them out. They are a sensor with a USB end that plugs into any USB having computer that isn't a Mac at the moment, but I know they're working on that. So the sensor thing plugs into any computer. It has a little USB Giddy Up that you can plug in all sorts of things. So you can do the electrodes, and you can do the pulse catcher, and you can do EKGs. Like, you can actually collect data on humans. It's portable. It is relatively inexpensive. So these were all pros in the pro category here. The labs are built in a platform. They already exist. And so in the world of time, holy crap, the labs are already made, which is amazing. So and they're fully editable, which if you have time, we're going to want to edit stuff. So, but if you don't have time, how nice to be able to just deliver it as is and let it roll. So this platform, it's another platform. I think that goes into my con category, because there's a tech curve for the students. They have to log in, they have to buy a license, they have to learn a new platform, but they can get into the platform together, which means one student can hook up to these sensors and all the other students can see the data that that student is collecting. So the platform lets the students work together, which to me is pure gold. It also, I don't know if any of y'all have been thinking or hearing about HighFlex. And again, this is like, oh my gracious, we're probably already doing it in a lot of ways, because even if you're teaching face-to-face or fully online, I think about my little cadaver tour last week, we're providing opportunities for students in whatever they need. So if you've got a face-to-face class going on and somebody says, dude, my kid came down with COVID, I'm out for 2 weeks, this LT sensor Giddy Up would let the students actually meaningfully participate in the lab activities, even if they can't be in the same space. Okay, those are all my pros and cons. Okay, here I saw a question go sliding by, I think, about liability. And I don't know what the question was, but we had to have students. So in my online scene, I ended up having students form groups, and then they checked out the kit, the sensors. One student checked out the sensors, and the rest of the group worked with that person who was collecting data. We learned that you shouldn't check out the sensors unless you also have another human on which to do the experiments. So it was difficult for the students to be the only one collecting data. They couldn't collect it on themselves because they couldn't push all the buttons and stay still to actually collect the data. So that was a learning curve situation that we have figured out. But I included in the resources the liability checkout form that I had students fill out in order to get the kit. I have 8 million things to say, imagine that, about that checkout process. And the most important thing I have to say about it is have community with your students. So I wouldn't feel comfortable sending, I don't know, like $500 worth of equipment home with a student, no matter what the resource, like no matter what they signed. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that unless I knew them. And I do. I have 65 students this semester in my physiology classes, and I know them. I spend a just tremendous amount of time talking, chatting, checking in, connecting, and learning who they are. So that makes me feel more comfortable saying, okay, you cool taking this equipment and getting it back to us. You'll notice that whatever that thing was called in the resources tab, that is the legal document that they had to sign, that was approved by our legal humans. So our college said we're on board to do this. We do have classes on campus, so we're not mailing these things away. We're providing them for pickup from students who are present on our campus. Okay, we're going to have time for some questions here in a second, but we do have a poll question for you, and I recommend this. First of all, I love the ADI humans because they're super awesome, and they will be able to give you a sample, and they'll be able to walk you through it, show you stuff, answer your questions. That's awesome. I'm really excited. This semester was my guinea pig semester. I'm really excited to make some refinements for next semester and roll it out again. I see. Awesome. This is good. And you, I'm sure, know that you can always reach out to the ADI humans, even if you don't put your name in this little hat to have them holler at you. But Okay, this is awesome. Let's move forward. I think I move forward. Yes. I don't know if that closed. I don't know if you can still answer it or not, but we're going to wrap it up so we have a little bit of time for questions if you have them. This is a random list of advice that I have for you on lab work. And the first thing, and I think we should do this everywhere in our lives, and I especially think we should do this in our online classes, in all aspects of our online classes, because the tech learning curve is really high, and it's high for us, and it's high for our students. So think carefully about why you want them to do a thing. As long as I've been involved in online education, the first thing they say is, do not try to take your face-to-face class and turn it into an online class. Take your learning outcomes, take your goals, take your intentions, and use those to develop your online class. So in our incredibly content-heavy courses, I think that's really important for us all to do. Be thoughtful about variety. And I say be thoughtful because I personally like variety. I don't like getting bored. I want to do something different every time. But that means there's the learning curve that goes with that, right? Like if you do a new platform every week, then the students are going to have to learn that new thing. And there is value to getting to go in and be in a place where you've already been, and not have to figure out how to get to the building and how to access the equipment. You know, you've already done that part. So the learning curve is a little more thoughtful. On the other hand, that first semester online where I did nothing but virtual activities, the simulations, that I did not like that. And I got bored, and I'm sure that the students got bored. Be thoughtful about quantity. I don't really know how we were pulling it off before in the face-to-face scene. I'm not sure we were, but we just are drowning our students in quantity of content. And the outcome, I'll have this conversation with y'all lots and lots of times, I'm sure, in the next chunk. But they don't remember it all anyway. I don't remember it all anyway, unless I'm using it because I'm teaching it. And so they're going to forget it. So why are we asking them to memorize it all? So I think this is a discussion that is worth having for all of us. And then glory days. We all have to be thoughtful about everybody's workload, ours and theirs. And my last piece of advice is to invest in creating community in your online classes. It's the thing. It's the place where I can look at what's happening in my online classes in the lab component and the lecture component, and I can say, I'm satisfied. It's hard and I'm tired, and so are they, but we have a community and we're pulling it off. So, okay. I can't remember if I'm supposed to do the next audience poll.
I got it, Wendy. No worries.
Sarah's arrived.
I'm here. Yep. I'll come on camera in a second. I just want to get this poll launched before I do. So this last poll is single select. So how are you currently running your labs? You may have shared a little bit in the chat already, but we want to capture this data so that we can learn a little bit more about the community that's here, which is an awesome community. You guys are super interactive, and I'm just loving this chat. This might be the most fun I've ever had doing a webinar. So awesome. And thank you so much for being so active. I'm going to leave this open for a little bit so that people can get their answers in. And while I do that, hello, everyone. Okay, so we do have lots of questions that came in. Some of them are comments, but let's maybe address this now. Okay, so the first question is, how do folks include scientific methods in their anatomy labs?
Oh, dude. Yes, I want to know the answer to that question. Because I totally, as I was thinking about my priorities and going, I want students to understand the process of science, I was thinking about, well, it's not really experimentation in the anatomy lab, but right? But the anatomy science is not experimentation. So I am super curious. I can't offer up much in that regard, but I'm curious if anybody has comments in the chat, or that would be a really interesting thing to look at.
Definitely. We're getting lots of comments here about how to address this awkward situation, about how classes are currently online, but they do plan to go back in person in the near future, and they're hesitant, or their institutions are hesitant to release funds to make these online labs more interactive. Do you have any advice on how to kind of address that?
So I did want to talk about, and I can't remember if I said it out loud, but the funding that I received to get the LT sensors, which again, that like it's resources that students can now borrow. And, we have a lab tech who is managing all of the checkouts, and we have a dean who is aware of the whole thing and will help us hunt down humans if they don't get our stuff back to us. That whole network, that is, I got money from the career education division, and the argument, they got a grant for strong workforce funding. And the argument that their dean, who is now our vice president of instruction, the argument that she made is that, hey, these are nursing students. Like these students are going to be in the career education pathway. And I've never in my life had an experience of someone coming to me and saying, what do you want? Let's buy it for you. And I promptly said, LT sensors, pretty please with sugar on top. So you might look into that route. The other thing that's true is I think it would be interesting for us to put together a list of the resources that argue online education isn't going away. And not just because of COVID, but because students' lives are hectic. And online creates a flexibility for them. If we show up and do it right, it creates a flexibility that lets them keep going. So providing high quality online education is actually an equitizing move that I think institutions, I don't know, I think they should be investing in this. So COVID money, you might look into that as a way to fund something like this. But your online people, I know in California, the community colleges we recognize that online education is good for students. If it's good, we want good on, we don't want them to be jumping through hoops. We want them to be learning the material, and we believe that they can. So it's a high priority.
Definitely.
I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you did perfectly. And I think it's something that probably everybody has struggled with or is struggling with right now. So great to chat about it. We've got another question here. How do you build community online? I can barely get 10% of students to turn on their cameras in a 100-person class.
Oh my gosh. This is a whole workshop. Like what we should do next is we should have that conversation, building community in an online class. What I will tell you is in California, again, we have just an amazing human. Her name is Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and she's producing content and research around humanizing online learning. And she has strategies. We should have thrown it into the resources, but if somebody wants to go Google humanizing online learning and post a link there, her stuff is scalable, and we can make change over time. For me, I get to know my students. The first several weeks of class are very high touch. I have a chat tool that is embedded in my LMS that is also attached to my phone, and my students can message me at any time. I know that that probably makes you all go, oh my God, no. But I'm telling you, it's fast. It's super efficient. Like, I can send little sweet emojis and hugs and love and rah rah, and they feel heard and connected. And it's quick on my end. It's another one of those things that it's difficult to do, but connecting them to each other, we got to connect them to each other so that the whole load isn't on you. And that chat tool also facilitates that kind of work. So I think we should have a whole workshop on humanizing or creating connections in online learning.
Absolutely. I mean, we struggle with this as producers of webinars. You know, they're very linear lectures. You can't see your attendees, which makes it tricky. And, you know, the whole webinar fatigue, the online learning fatigue, everyone is struggling with that still, even though it's been a year and a half or almost 2 years of sitting through all of this. So I think if I can just offer one kind of aspect or one facet of this for advice, everyone is struggling with that. So mentioning it and bringing it up and being honest about it and saying, like, I don't like these online labs any more than you do. But if we're all together and we all join forces and have those shared experiences, that's a really good way to just kind of kick off the course. And we try to do that with some of our more interactive webinars too. So everyone struggles with this, not just teachers.
Yeah, and I think look at what happened. I don't know how many of you guys got to attend the workshops in the spring, that we got to do with these guys through HAPS, and we looked at that and we were so lonely during those workshops. It was so quiet. That's just not very HAPSy at all. And so then we figured out, like, how can we, like Sarah the Amazing has figured out how to make it so that we can talk to each other in these, even if I can't see you, we can still talk to each other. And I see all the chatter in the chat. It's super awesome. That's how we do it. We connect that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think shared experiences are so important, especially now that we're all kind of alone in our houses. So definitely a great way to make community. We do have time for at least one more question. This one has come up a lot in the chat, and now it's also in the Q&A, so I'll address this one. Do many post-bachelor health professional schools, medicine, veterinary, dental, accept online labs for their admission eligibility course requirements? I can't speak to any of this, but I'm sure, Wendy, you've probably dealt with this.
Definitely dealt with this. And this is a thing that I know in the past has been an issue. And it's one of the reasons why we refused to offer lab work online. Because we were afraid. We didn't want students to take our classes and then have it not work for them to get into their program, whatever they wanted to get into. I just learned that our online, like, I don't know how you get funding or whatever, and you code your classes. And I just learned that there is a lab code that requires you to be in the same space at the same time with an instructor. And then there is fully online asynchronous, and all of our lab activities are coded that way. And if they're fully online, and I asked, I'm like, oh my God, does this matter? And was told, no, it does not matter. But I honestly think that I've seen phenomenal online classes, and I've seen dismal face-to-face classes, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So we never know what the student's experience is when you get a transcript and are looking to get someone into your program. And I think that has to be part of the conversation when we're looking at whether or not to accept online laboratory experiences from students. So
Yeah,
that is
definitely.
my way of saying I have no idea what people are doing, but I think it's an important question and an important conversation.
Absolutely. So we have officially hit the 1 hour mark, and I just want to thank you so much, Wendy, for your insights today, your presentation. It really was such a pleasure to have you with us.
Super awesome. And thank you guys. I can't wait to go look at the chat and see all the conversations that you had. It's not surprising to me. Hamsters like to talk. So
There is a lot
it's
going
awesome.
on, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
You're getting so many compliments right now. So you'll probably really enjoy reading the last minute of this chat. I also want to thank all of the attendees for joining today, for being super interactive. This is so much fun, and I hope that you found it helpful and enjoyable. So yeah, thank you. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be available later today. So look out for an email from the system letting you know when that's ready. Before you go, we'd love to get your feedback on the survey. So I'm going to bring that up on your screen right now. There it is. So yeah, we want to know a little bit more about your situation, a little bit more about what you're interested in hearing about next, and also just your general feedback on your experience today. If you do have any more questions for Wendy or anyone else, feel free to submit them now using the chat and the Ask a Question panel. We'll make sure to forward them along to Wendy specifically. And in closing, thank you so much again for taking part in this Inside Scientific webinar made possible by AD Instruments and Wendy. And we really look forward to having you with us again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.